thank you all for coming. Thank you, Bryn. Thank you, Carrie. 21st annual healthcare conference. This is fantastic. Dan, thank you for making the trek.
Pleasure.
From the Bay Area.
Thank you for inviting me back.
So I hope we'll have a wide-ranging discussion, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. I'll start by saying something that I tell people in orientation when they come in. And, you know, our students are very ambitious, very curious, and they're also, you know, commercially minded, but they also want to do good. And now we start to think, what areas are going to change the world over the next half a century, let's say? And in some senses, technology, climate change, life sciences. And there's tremendous interest in that space. And you've been sort of one of the key leaders that have navigated this area for now 3 to 4 decades. From big pharma to biotech, to acquiring companies, to seeing how, can you sort of paint a picture for us a little bit, especially in the pharma-biotech relationship, and how this has evolved through the arc of your career, for example?
Sure. And thank you very much for having me, and Bryn, for your organization. I'm delighted to be here with all of you. It's great to be back on campus and not in Uris Hall. So I know I'm dating myself, but these facilities are amazing. And I'm really looking forward to our discussion today and your questions. Look, I couldn't agree more with what you said, and I've been privileged over the past more than 3 decades to actually do exactly what you said, be a part of business, but also do incredible things for the planet. Currently at Gilead Sciences, we are working on ending the HIV epidemic, and it's real. I think it's real within our generation. I'll get back to that, but curing diseases, ending epidemics is what drives me, and I know my colleagues every day as well. Back to this question about, the biotech, biopharma segment. All I can say, because I've lived all over the world, I'm sure like many of you, first of all, the US is the envy of the world in terms of the ecosystem that exists around innovative medicines and life sciences. Everybody wants, go everywhere. You go to Japan, you go to Europe. Everybody would love to have what we have here in the United States, which is this, the capital that's put to work in both startups, biotechs, and then, large sophisticated pharma companies to kind of bring that through the value chain and get it to patients, not just in this country, but around the globe. And I think it is a true competitive advantage to the United States right now. And we're all global companies, but I think it's really critical. Now, the ecosystem works because you have this entrepreneurial environment of really a whole segment of our industry sector that really focuses on brand new ideas. That happens in biopharma, that happens in academia, that happens in biotech. And the important thing is that you have venture funding, you have capital funding that supports that overall. What I would say, and I learned this, I reinforced it at my value investing class in Columbia, is that the sustainable competitive barrier to entry for our industry is the robustness of patents. At the end of the day, because let's face it, you can't put the type of at-risk capital, whether it's biotech or big pharma, to work if you don't have a period of exclusivity to return your investment, particularly in a segment that, like we work in, where more than 90% of everything we or biotech starts fails. And not just starts, well, 99% of things fail. But that is kind of at the mid stage. When you get a medicine out of the preclinical phase and put it into humans, 90% fails. And of that 10% that succeeds, so it's a fraction that are really kind of game-changing curative therapies or changes. So, it's not for the faint of heart, as you all know, but it also requires that, that when that capital is put to work, that there's a protection period of time to return on the investment. And I'll get back to that because I think that's, still, I believe medicines are the most, cost-efficient way to get healthcare outcomes and healthcare results. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But this ecosystem can't be taken for granted. I mean, we need to make sure we, not just in our industry, but industries respect intellectual property and that preserves itself. The other thing I would just say right now in this ecosystem is the rapidity of science and where it's going right now. It's definitely exponentially altering in a lot of disease areas. So it's an exciting time to be in this ecosystem here in this country.
I want to talk about one exciting thing that you're doing among many, and that's precision oncology, your acquisition of Kite Pharma, cell therapy, and what do you see over the next 10 years, so to speak, from that space?
Yeah, I've been a student and an active participant in personalized medicine for 20 years now or so. And at its very essence, it means, how do we avoid somebody taking a medicine that's not going to benefit from it? And how do you get transformational benefit from a medicine? And, I think that intersection between diagnosis, between prediction of response to a medicine, all that is enabled not just within biopharma, but also diagnostics, in vitro diagnostics, imaging, all the other aspects of life sciences more broadly. What I would say is I think, and this gets back to where the science is going, there's no more personalized medicine today than one of our businesses at Gilead, which is cell therapy. And just for those of you that, it's a company called Kite that we acquired 6-7 years ago. And really what it does is, now today it's really used in blood cancers and particular types of blood cancers. But what you essentially do is you remove the immune system cells from a patient's body that has a particular form, in this case, large B-cell lymphoma. You engineer them in a lab, you train them essentially to attack that specific type of cancer that patient has, and then you infuse them back into the body. And what we're getting actually phenomenally with a disease that used to have a 6-month prognosis for life, 50% of patients out now to 7 years are alive with only one treatment. Essentially, the disease is gone. Now, there's more to do. We have to get to the other 50% of the patients. We have to take this to other diseases. It's also now used in multiple myeloma. We're looking at using it in solid tumors like glioblastoma and then autoimmune diseases. But it's so exciting right now to think about these type of transformational results. And again, I think we're just getting going on this aspect of personalized healthcare in a whole new era.
You should be having Columbia in your radar screen. We're investing incredibly in that space.
Great.
As we speak.
I do have Columbia on my radar screen, but I'll have it for that now.
So we talked about sort of the funnel. You start from ideas, a lot of them fail. Then, after a lot of painful process, you get to the point that you start to see some promising results. Still 90% of them fail. And so I want to step back and ask you a little bit about data, analytics, and AI. And the extent to which these technologies can actually help drug discovery, potentially help improving on the 99 and then improving on the 90% by avoiding false starts a little bit more deliberately. And take us through your sort of journey in that, because in your previous job, you started making acquisitions of that almost like 10 years ago. So you've been at it for at least a decade. And how is it being used today? What do you see in the horizon from that space?
Yeah, I mean, what you're referring to specifically is this company called Flatiron that was founded here in New York, and the concept behind it was to take EMR data from different cancer institutions, electronic medical records, and make it a meaningful data source for real-world data for a variety of things. You could use it for regulatory purposes. You could use it to test that drug discovery that we talked about. And if you could bring, by the way, the model is such that if you bring that 90%, failure rate down to even 88, it's extraordinary what a difference it makes.
I know.
You understand. So I mean, that was one of many companies that was really about using, if you like, machine learning, AI, to enable drug discovery. I mean, I'll say this before I get deeper into that, that drug discovery aspect. Obviously, AI is totally transforming every aspect of our business. There's no doubt about it. I think the low-hanging fruit is to use these real-world data sources, for instance, in our clinical development programs to better recruit trials, to make sure you get the types of trial representation and you get that faster by using models based upon real-world data. We use it in our manufacturing, we use it in our back offices, we use it in our commercial organization so that you have kind of the next best action with a customer. Where I think there's a lot of hype right now, if I can say this, is around drug discovery. And hype is good, by the way. I'm not saying that's bad. There's a lot of capital flowing into different types of AI drug discovery companies. But the reason it's different from all those other applications is that biodata is not the same as language-based models. It's not the same as other models that are being applied to AI, as you know. I mean, the problem with biodata is, first of all, each one of you has somewhere around 30 trillion cells in your body. We categorize diseases conveniently, but the reality is that within any two individuals in this room that may have the same disease, it's probably a very heterogeneous application of that disease in your body. So, as you can imagine, I mean, garbage in, garbage out. The problem right now with applying it robustly to drug discovery is that it's complex, it's messy, it's incomplete data that we have in these data sources. So applying AI models to those will only get you so far. Where it does help us a lot in drug discovery today is once we identify a target, let's say we look at multiple proteins to try to target that medicine. In the past, that might have taken 6 to 9 months by our chemists in the lab. With these technologies, there's protein folding, great protein folding technology that allows us to bring that down. I mean, even if you bring that down by 3 months or 6 months, again, area under the curve for your ability to recoup investment and make a difference for patients is really significant. So, of course, over time, that messy data, that complex data will get better and better and better. And so it's only going to help us enable it more. So I think it's great, back to the first question we had, that we have a lot of companies that are in this space, that are playing around with early drug discovery. A company like ours does some of that in-house, and we do it by collaborations and connections. But it's going to take a while. I mean, we're not yet at the stage where you push a button on a particular disease and out comes the drug. But it's enabling every aspect of our business, and it's going to help us get medicines that can prevent diseases and cure patients to patients quicker. And over time, it's going to help us be even more efficient on the drug discovery side.
You mentioned Flatiron, and then you mentioned sort of the corpus of data that they were mining to extract insights. Are we moving into a direction where, we will have consolidated data sources for my medical history, your medical history, everybody's medical history, so we can actually do analysis over time and cross-sectionally? And is that something that is in the horizon?
Oh, definitely, yeah. And I mean, specifically what Flatiron does today, and other companies now do this too, but they were on the cutting pioneer edge, is they take exactly that data. The problem with that data is it's messy. It needs to be curated. It needs to be curated by health professionals, nurses, other folks that can determine, let's say you have an image, determine what image is going to be most indicative of the type of disease you have. And so what Flatiron did is it was a very manual labor process. They hired a whole bunch of nurses and health techs to go in and look at a particular patient's EMR data and clean it up, make sense of it, because as you know, our EMR systems are A, not connected today in this country, and B, very messy. And what they did is they had AI models kind of observing what those humans did. It's kind of like Waymo. I don't know how many of you live in San Francisco, but I take Waymos all the time, and I feel like more comfortable in a Waymo than I do in an Uber, because, I mean, it's extraordinary how much data they have and how they can avoid things. So what they did is they kind of, trained the models based upon humans, which is the same way that Waymo did it. And it's getting better and better. And it makes it much less, obviously, much more cost efficient, much less labor intensive when you have models that have seen humans kind of curate this data over time. And so the power of that, and then of course, the other obviously advantage that's going on right now is because of the quantity of data in healthcare, having computing power is extraordinarily important. And that, that used to be a limitation. It's becoming less and less of a limitation in all the aspects of AI. So I think that's really going to accelerate this AI curation for the types of data sets that we have. And that, again, I think it's going to be exponential in terms of where we go.
So I want to move into business models and economics. And, you just mentioned cell therapy, creating targeted sort of treatments, and then basically removing the disease for 50% of the people that get administered that treatment. So we are now moving in a direction where, Gilead is sort of pioneering, where we can cure things rather than chronically care for things. And we have a whole ecosystem built around the latter. And it's a vexing problem, right? What are the economics? What are the incentives? How do we price? I mean, you've clearly have been scratching the surface of that space. Can you share some of your thinking on that?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We have archaic-based reimbursement models for technology that's exponentially advancing. I mean, again, I joined Gilead around 6 years ago, and this predates me, but Gilead is only it's only about a 35-year-old company. And in that period of time, and when you consider the fact that any new medicine, on average, takes about 15 years and $2.6 billion to try to get through the other end, and that includes all the failure rate. It's pretty extraordinary that Gilead in that period of time has done two things, and now we're entering into a whole new phase. But they cured hepatitis C with a 12-week course of oral therapy. For those of you that don't, hepatitis C, now, thankfully, is a much less common disease, but it was a more common disease 10 years ago. And, we had no real significant treatments for it. And left untreated, it goes on to liver cirrhosis, liver transplants, huge costs at end of life kind of for hepatitis C. So you can imagine, if you introduced a pill that you take for 12 weeks and it's curative, you can imagine, back to the economics of that, what that does for the healthcare system. I mean, today, and by the way, this number has been solid in the United States for about 20 years, only around 14% of overall healthcare costs go to medicines, and that's been solid and steady over that period of time. And net price of medicines actually goes down over the patent life. And then obviously, after a patent life, 90% of the medicines in this country are generic. It works, it's efficient, it's an efficient system. It goes to pennies on the dollar, so that innovation is then available for humankind for the rest of eternity. And you put capital back into new innovation. I mean, the system is really robust and good. Having said that, the way we pay for medicines during their period of time is still quite archaic. We, for one, I should say, by the way, the other thing that Gilead did in addition to curing hepatitis C is they took HIV from a death sentence, literally a death sentence in the late 80s, to a chronic preventable illness. And we believe, we now have some new medicines that could literally end the epidemic if applied correctly. But what we have to come up with is models that are value-based, of course. And I know you'll have other speakers talk about that today. It's easier said than done. We've wanted to do this for many years. It gets back a little bit to the fractionated data system that we have in this country. We don't have, universal healthcare in this country, and you don't have a data system on patients that you have in other countries. And we're experimenting in this country and in other countries on value-based systems. I mean, back to that cell therapy example, we'd be very happy to be reimbursed only for the people that respond to that cell therapy and get cured. today, there are no systems that allow you to do that because people change insurers all the time. So you might get the one-time treatment with one insurer and then you go on to another insurer. So there isn't, the mechanics of the system are not there to kind of support this value-based model.
Or the insurer that pays for your treatment doesn't get the benefit because then you change jobs and you move insurance.
Exactly. So what's the incentive for that insurer to absorb a relatively large one-time payment if they don't get the benefit of that over periods of time? So, and we have ideas for this, by the way. I'm not just complaining. I think there are ways that we could look at solving these issues. First of all, for government-paid patients, and then for people that have commercial insurance over that period of time. But I do think the other thing is prevention in this country. I mean, again, the best way to have a good economic outcome for a disease is to prevent it in the first place. We now have a medicine in HIV. We've had one pill once a day medicines for both treatment and prevention in HIV that are extraordinarily effective. Just on the treatment side, if you take your medicine every day and you have HIV, you basically die from something else. And you can't transmit the disease because the viral load level is so low that you're untransmissible. So if you want to end epidemics, first of all, you have to take the people with the disease and make it such that they can't pass it on. And we have that technology today. But we also have a medicine today that if you take one pill once a day, it's almost 100% effective at preventing the disease. One of the new medicines that our scientists came up with after 16 or 17 years, this is a bit of a unicorn molecule, is they took that one pill once a day, and now there's a medicine that's under review right now with the FDA that we think will be approved in September that is twice a year. It's an injection, but it's an injection that began by a healthcare professional twice a year. And in one of the trials that we had two trials. In one case, it was 100% effective at preventing cisgender women in South Africa from developing HIV, some of the most underserved individuals in HIV zones in the world. And the second one was cisgender men, and that was 99.9% effective. So, back to economic argument. If you could eradicate the globe with HIV, which we believe we can do, I mean the economics of that are enormous. I mean, the amount of capital that has to go in today to treating people or preventing the disease. So, I mean, these are we have to come up with new models to allow us to, to get these new advances to as many people as possible.
You're doing a lot of work in actually thinking how to make this available, essentially at an economic arrangement to other parts of the world that can benefit from that treatment without having to sort of suffer a sort of insurmountable cost. Can you walk us through a little bit?
Yeah, look,
because that's really what you do good.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, this has been, and by the way, there are other companies that do this as well. But I think that Gilead is because of the nature of the diseases that we work on, we've been at the forefront of this. And this gets back at doing well by doing good, and why I enjoy working with Gilead so much. So this medicine, this twice-a-year medicine for HIV, immediately after we heard these results, we voluntarily licensed this to 6 generic manufacturers, right? I mean, now is a period of time that the patent starts, but for the developing world, we immediately transferred this to 6 generic manufacturers. They have a royalty-free license. We will have no economic benefit for 120 low and middle income countries. And we technology transfer, we train those individuals to make that medicine. This has happened, by the way, with hepatitis C. It's happened with other medicines we have for HIV. But it's one of the reasons I'm so proud to work with Gilead, because there should be an ability for us as a private company to be able to make sure that we get our medicines to everybody around the world. In some cases, that's going to be working with insurers in this country and working with the government to make sure there's very good reimbursement. And there is very good reimbursement in this country on HIV medicines and prevention. Most people should have to pay nothing out of pocket to get those medicines. But for those 120 resource-limited countries, we now have a sustainable model where generic manufacturers can make that medicine for people at pennies on the dollar. And then there's a middle group of countries that we have, tiered-based pricing that meets them where they're at in terms of their economics. And I think, again, back to our commitment to end diseases, it does have implications on your business model. I mean, if you've looked at Gilead's revenue over time, and I think the courage that went with this, it went, when you cure hepatitis C, the good news is, you're successful in the revenue side. The good news also is there's fewer people with hepatitis C and your revenue comes down again. So you have to be willing to both have continual innovation, but also ride some of those mountains if you're going to be brave enough to kind of, end diseases.
What fraction of your revenue comes from the United States?
We're about 75%. We're heavier weighted in the United States than most biopharma companies.
I mean, I want to switch a little bit to talk about China. Last week I was in California and I arrived the day after DeepSeek sort of made the news, and we were talking constantly with everyone about geopolitics, AI, and competition. But pharma and biotech is actually an area that there is some interesting sort of dynamic going with China as well. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time in China, and it gets back to what we spoke about in terms of industrial policy. Now, what China used to be known for is low-cost generics, taking other people's intellectual property and producing low-cost generics for their country. In the past 5 to 10 years, but particularly the past 5 years, they've been very, very specific about industrial policy around a few key sectors. And what that's done is they've gone from really being a country that hasn't had a whole lot of innovation to a country that, my scientists tell me it's probably about, 40 to 50% of the innovation of the United States on new molecular entities in about a decade period of time. When China sets their mind to something, and they resource it and they fund it, and they have the talent that they have on the life sciences side, I mean, they can be very successful.
Do American companies or European companies acquire smaller biotechs in China as well?
Yes, absolutely.
That has started?
That has started in earnest. I don't think there's a large biopharma company that doesn't either have an acquisition or a partnership with a China company. And that was very different 10 years ago. I mean, there was nothing, just to show, I mean, it's a short period of time that this has happened.
Wow.
It has implications geopolitically for governments too, that they have to think through. But from our perspective, we want to source the best science wherever it is. Collaborating with a China-based company that, is more of a domestic-oriented company on a particular medicine, and then we develop it for the rest of the world. I mean, those are the types of arrangements I think that we're seeing today. But it's shockingly fast.
Yeah.
Shockingly fast. I mean, every other country has tried to do. I mean, Japan used to be a very, very innovative-based company, and sadly, I spent time living in Japan. That is less so today. But China's been very, very successful in a short period of time.
So I want to switch to a few more questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience. And I want to switch to you as a leader rather than talking a little bit about the industry. And in some sense, you've had a very long and successful career in 2 companies, right? And you had an incredibly successful tenure at Roche, right? And then you moved to an incredibly successful, strong biotech. You moved in, and you had to take a company that was different, smaller, different area, different focus, different culture, right? And lead it to incredible new journey. How was that transition?
It was exciting. It was certainly not boring. Yeah, look, Roche it's such a large company. In many ways, I feel like I had 5 or 6 company experiences at Roche because I had the opportunity to work in many countries. Look, I'm a generalist, so I was very intrigued in trying to get the full breadth of the value chain. I always considered it a great success if I could move countries and and disciplines at the same time. And so I started in sales and marketing. I went to product development. I did time in business development, general management, and then I also had a chance to work on both diagnostics and pharma. And that was a great experience because diagnostics is a completely different business model. It doesn't rely upon IP like the biopharma industry does. It's more of a razor blade model, but fascinating and such an important and underappreciated, I think, part of healthcare. So I had a tremendous opportunity over that period of time. But coming to Gilead, so I've always aspired to try to take on positions where I could stretch myself, and learn. And the reason I came to Gilead was twofold. Number one, I had been running the pharma business at Roche for about 8 years at that stage. And while it was terrific and I could have kept doing that, I was, my learning curve was flattening out a bit and I was ready for something new. I didn't think Gilead would become available at this stage. Gilead started about 3 months after I started in the industry, actually. It started, so just to put that into context. And I always admired Gilead from the outside. They were a bit countercultural. They were small biotech, but they overnight became kind of large biopharma when they cured hepatitis C. They always had this approach to the developing world that was very, very different than the traditional pharma world. So they had this health equity piece of it that was so critical and kind of on balance with science. And, the reason I found it interesting is because when I came in, the revenues were coming down based upon the hepatitis C cure. And so the board was looking for somebody that could come in, build a team, honor Gilead's past, which is actually one of the most exciting things, I think, that I've done on the journey over the 6 years. Because easily when you come in, you can imagine and you have to transform a company, you could easily, discount, the strength of the company in the past. And so I was very conscious of that to such a degree that in virology, which was the home base for the company, and chemistry, I think it's gotten stronger over the past 6 years. And at the same time, we knew we had to develop new therapeutic areas because we were too large of a company to rely on one only. So we approached a very scientific process on what those new therapeutic areas would be. The science at Gilead is second to none, and it's largely based around immunology or immune-based approaches to care. And so we were dogmatic about wanting to get into diseases that would have synergies with that. And so we went into oncology because of the whole advances of immuno-oncology and using the immune system to tamper down cells that are out of control in your body. And then we also went into autoimmune diseases, immunology, where the reverse is true, where your immune system is overactive and you have to dampen it. The reason that's so important scientifically when we thought that through is because sometimes you're upregulating with the same target and sometimes you're downregulating. And so there were a lot of synergies, and there are a lot of synergies across our 3 therapeutic areas. So we had to build those 3, and we're still in the process of building them. But cell therapy in cancer is one example. We have another antibody drug conjugate in cancer. We have some really exciting things in inflammation. But back to not wanting to lose the culture of the company and its roots, virology became even stronger. Like a year after I got to Gilead, COVID hit. And it was so impressive to see how the organization, the scientists reacted. We had the very first medicine approved for COVID 6 months after we knew the disease existed, called remdesivir, which still today is the only medicine in the hospital setting that really saves lives in the hospital setting for late-stage patients. And just to see the machinery of the organization work around both aspects, the science and quickly getting this into clinical trials and regulatory, but then also the health equity component. We quickly set up voluntary licenses and donated supplies because of the 14 million people that have been treated with remdesivir, 12 people are in the developing world, actually, only 2 people in the developed world. So that's a really important cultural aspect of Gilead. And we're now taking those 2 sides of that coin into oncology too. We're approaching diseases that serve underserved communities like multiple myeloma or triple negative breast cancer. And we're using some of those same techniques we used with virology to make sure those that are underserved in this country and around the globe have access to our medicines. And that'll be certainly the case with inflammation. So look, it's been an amazing 6 years. We're just getting going. It's all about building a team. It's a very exciting time right now at Gilead, so I'm happy to be there. So
what do you do to relax?
I do relax. Look, my family is critical to me. I've got three adult children and my wife. And then I find it, believe it or not, relaxing to do athletics. So I'm a fitness junkie. I do triathlons, but I do it for the mental benefit. The physical benefits are kind of side effects. So every morning I do something to get my brain going. I don't drink coffee, but that's my endorphin push every morning, and it makes me much more effective every day. And then look, I read books and sit on the beach too. So just to be clear, I do relax.
So last question. You've had a 30-year career since your time here at the business school. We have a room full of incredibly ambitious MBA students that are about to launch, and they're thinking of their next 30 years. What advice would you give? And then we'll open it up to the audience.
I don't dole out a lot of advice, but I would say, look, I think you're at an extraordinary institution. I went to business school about 10 years after my undergraduate and 10 years after working in industry for a while, and I did the EMBA program here. For me, being a science undergrad, it was so helpful to get the basics of strategy and finance, which have helped me so much. But I would say, and one of my colleagues is here actually, my classmates were. You may not want to hear this, but they're equally important to my development as were the academic programs. You probably do want to.
I agree.
But it was, and some of them would say they carried me through the program. I know, but I would say this, that it was such a great group of peers and colleagues that I went through that I keep in touch with still today. But just learning, because everybody had a different background and a different experience, and it was just so helpful for me to understand different careers. Because if you stay in one life sciences your whole life, you're a little bit sheltered, and so that was terrific. So my advice to all of you is, it may be too late if you're graduating the end of this year, but make sure you pay attention to your peers and your colleagues. I think there's such a great resource for you, and I'm sure you've done that already. The other thing is, just pursue your passion. There's so many things to do out there. And if you can find the intersection of what your passion is and business, I feel so lucky that I've been able to find something that I'm super interested in science. I'm very interested in leadership. I'm fascinated by, and I'm always on a leadership journey to try to figure out how I can be a better leader for my team. And then I'm very, very passionate about, global public health and having a chance to literally, cure diseases or change epidemics. If you can find whatever your passion is, if you can find that intersection for you, get out there and do it. It's so rewarding.
Good. So we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Do we have mics? So. Okay, so maybe there, and then we'll come here.
Good morning, thank you. Aaron Aben, class of '82, and
you got me beat.
And I run the autoimmune registry. I actually have a cousin who passed away from hepatitis C, and it was in 2011.
Oh.
And it was just as that drug was finishing its clinical trials. He was ineligible for the trial, I believe. But it just it's all. I always think about that and the importance of speed in getting through the clinical trial process. So in autoimmune disease, it's a real problem.
Yes.
Can you think of any ways that process for running clinical trials can be sped up to help those patients?
I appreciate that. Sorry for your loss. It's extraordinary how it went from one day being a death sentence to being a curable disease. Look, speed is is critically important. I mean, that remdesivir example is just one example of how we think about speed. That was at a time of a pandemic. We were able to do some things that perhaps couldn't be done in normal times. But specifically around autoimmune diseases, I think there's a great need to increase speed. I mean, and it's the benefit-risk equation, right, at the end of the day. One of the things that has allowed speed to accelerate in cancer is that, so many cancers obviously have a very short lifespan. And so you're willing, as both a clinician, a clinical trialist, and a regulator, to take different types of risks, if you like, on speed of clinical trials. I mean, there's been tremendous work done in this country around, accelerated approval, and then you continue the data to make sure you have full approval. That doesn't exist yet in autoimmune disease, of course. And one of the reasons it doesn't exist is because, for the most part, it's a slower degrading disease, no less, debilitating, but slower degrading disease. The reason we're in autoimmune is and the other thing that's happened in autoimmune disease, if you allow me to speak as a generalist, is it's been very difficult to break through some of the efficacy barriers in a lot of diseases. We've had some, I would say, kind of first-generation targets in autoimmune diseases, which gets us to certain levels of efficacy in things like rheumatoid arthritis or inflammatory bowel disease. But frankly, if you look at the innovation over the past 15 years, we really haven't been able to get above that. You might get 20 or 30% of people responding more fully, but then they have to rotate through. So it's a huge medical need, and part of it is the science and understanding associated with that disease. So where oncology was, I think, 10 years ago, is where inflammation is today. And I believe that we now have a whole new cadre of interesting new targets, and targets that potentially have better tolerability. The reason that's important is, I think, like in oncology, the way we got to better effect in oncology is by combining medicines. But when you combine a medicine, you normally are doubling the side effect profile of it, unless you have really inert molecules like immuno-oncology molecules. But the good news is, I think we are coming at molecules that are likely to be more tolerable, that we can combine together, and then get a better effect size. In terms of the speed, I think we still have a long way to go. The traditional path in autoimmune disease is to pick a speedier disease for regulatory trials, something like atopic dermatitis, that you can see an effect quicker than others. But getting to IBD and RA takes a longer period of time. I do think that some of what we talked about before, some of the principles of AI in terms of clinical trial efficiency will help us speed some of the trials up. I do think we now have regulators that, with their experience in oncology, can help us, form trials more quickly. So we're looking at, every aspect of the value chain to try to bring time down, and it's critically important. The last thing I'll say on autoimmune disease is this is some really interesting early data on cell therapies in autoimmune diseases. Now, it's largely late-stage diseases right now, but we're seeing some huge effects on lupus and other diseases, small number of patients, again, back to a one-time treatment. Look, our scientists are excited about every therapeutic area, but I think what they're excited about is the step change that's going on in autoimmune disease right now. And so I think it's a combination of speed, but also just scientific knowledge of getting to new targets that are going to make a bigger difference. Hi?
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. My name's Chen Chao Gao. I'm an AMBA 2026 candidate, and I used to work for Gilead, Genentech.
Oh, great.
Yes.
Great.
And now I'm working for another big pharma, Daiichi Sankyo.
Yeah.
So I have two questions. First is 2 days ago, RFK Jr. was nominated and become the new health secretary.
It took so long to get an administration question. Thank you. I've been waiting for this. Honestly, I've been waiting. You didn't ask me. This is great. Let's talk about it. It's day 18.
Yeah. So question is about how will impact the healthcare industry and how, especially for the big pharma. The second question I have is Gilead made such a great purchases recently, and especially as you mentioned, Kite Pharma. So how do you usually measure the success of your acquisition? Whether this integration is fostering the innovation or something like that. So
yeah, thank you. It's a big question. I'll try to be short so we can get to a couple of questions. Happy to carry on the dialogue afterwards. Look, I think as most of us, on day 18, I think there's more we don't know than we know, so I'll just put that as a caveat. But the types of discussions we've been having from both the Gilead perspective and also in my chair role at Pharma, overall have been, I think, very encouraging about the view of biopharma as an industrial policy with the new administration, but also really wanting to make advances. Having said that, obviously there's a lot of appointments that are being made right now. I think it's promising that publicly the administration is talking about prevention in chronic diseases. I do believe that those are the places that we need to go in this country, and I think a lot of my peers and also myself, we have a lot to play out there. We obviously have to have a seat at the table. It's critically important because arguably vaccines are some of the most important ways to prevent diseases. The data is very clear on this. And so we want to have data-driven conversations, and we want to be at the table as the administration thinks about ways to improve biopharma in the system. I've had several conversations with people in the administration, and they're very interested also in value-based pricing, and we'd love to work with them on that, and probably you'll see more demonstration projects around that. And I think they're enthusiastic about. They saw this administration saw the benefits of the biopharma industry for COVID in the first administration. So when we talk about things like ending an epidemic with HIV and others, we're certainly hopeful we have a good audience on that side, and happy to dig into that in a little bit more detail. But back to your acquisition piece, I think it's a good one because I know many of you are studying multiple different industries. Back to the 90% failure rate, you have to have a portfolio approach in biopharma to be successful, of course. And we have sophisticated tools about risk reward and probability of success, and we do that for our internal portfolio, and we also do that for external acquisitions. So the thing I would say is that in order to measure appropriate use of capital in biopharma acquisitions, and it depends, there's all different types of structures. You could acquire a company like we did for $21 billion. You can partner with somebody and put capital in $5 billion and own 23% of the company. Those are all creative ideas that are geared towards that particular medicine and what we think the best structure is to enable that medicine. Sometimes you want to keep the company standalone. Sometimes you want to integrate it. So there's a lot of different options, which just provide some complication to evaluating return on investment. But at the end of the day, we very discipline-wise look at our investments over a period of time. But it does have to be over a period of time. Back to the fact that it takes 15 years for a molecule to get on the market, I think it's a mistake to look at return on capital with M&A in our sector in, let's say, a 3 or 5 year time frame. You have to look at it at a 10-year time frame. That frustrates some investors, I get it. But at the end of the day, you have to do that, and you have to do it on a portfolio basis. Because if everything you acquire is successful, you're doing something wrong. You have to be able to acquire things that fail. Like, we can't be afraid of failure if you want to push the envelope. In other words, if you only acquire things that are successful, you're probably going to get marginally differentiated products. And at the end of the day, they're not going to be economically advantageous to your shareholders as well. So we always look at it on a portfolio basis over time. But different companies are more or less successful with that, and we're very serious about evaluating that.
Question down here, and then maybe one up there.
How are we doing? Should I be quicker?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for a great talk. And what you said about HIV and what Gilead has done is profound, right? Those patients will die of something else.
Absolutely.
And so I wanted to apply that lens to oncology.
Yeah.
And I think it dovetails with what you said in your a couple answers ago about combinations and well-tolerated drugs and how that can maybe not make the tumor disappear completely, but let patients live a long time. Do you find that lets your companies see opportunities very differently from typical Wall Street? Because we're a small company with a drug for pancreatic cancer in phase 2A. The patient that had stable disease because their tumors shrank 24% but lived a long time, Wall Street didn't care about. The patient that had a complete response where the tumors went away, they cared a lot more about.
Yeah.
And so is the lens, and particularly the overall response rate lens that's used for kind of early stage oncology programs, do you think that kind of, the fact that everyone's so focused on that maybe creates opportunities for Gilead to see things differently?
Yeah, thank you for what you're doing, by the way. It's so important that the ecosystem is here. Look, at the end of the day, I think what you're generally talking about is, what type of robust surrogate markers can we use to determine a drug's long-term effect? Yep. Obviously, at the end of the day, the true test of whether a medicine is effective in oncology is whether they survive longer. It's called overall survival. Having said that, back to the need to get in disease states where people have very little or few options, the more we can get better surrogate markers. Obviously, in blood cancers, we have a pretty good surrogate marker in what's called minimal residual disease. You can measure that in blood to determine, before you ever get to survival, how well the cancer is evaporating. But I do think we'll probably have a separate discussion. We could get a little bit more technical about overall response rate versus partial response and complete response. But the good news is, in this country, in general, regulators have been quite progressive to help us along that path. And it's particularly important for smaller companies to have that opportunity to either get a medicine to patients quicker or to get interest from a larger company to bring it through the very late stages of development. So, yeah, more to come on that. But I appreciate that. Thank you.
One last question from up there.
Hello? Okay.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Joy Williams, CBS class of 01.
Hi, Joy.
I'm excited to hear about precision medicine and also health equity. I also don't find that those conversations are connected, and it seems to me that that would really be helpful, because when we talk about the social determinants of health, the protective effects of income or the expected protective effects of income of advanced education don't necessarily translate to Black women in particular. So as an example, between 2000 and 2005, graduates from here, I know 3 women who lost their babies. So in a population that never had more than 45 Black students here, so that's a tremendous number. So I'm wondering if you see that precision medicine and the accessibility that we hope it has can help us to increase health equity.
Look, I think it's such an important topic, Joy, and it's one of the things that we work on a lot, obviously both in the HIV community and now elsewhere. I think, some of these diseases where precision medicine is making a difference, have a significantly higher proportion of Black and brown individuals with that disease. For instance, multiple myeloma, triple negative breast cancer, as you mentioned. And HIV is, largely in the urban areas of this country, fairly well controlled with PrEP, but if you go to the rural South and where it's growing largely amongst Black males, MSMs in those areas. So all I can tell you is I couldn't agree more with the fact that we have to do more as a country to get to underserved communities, but we feel like we have a responsibility as Gilead as well. I'll give you some examples of this. So we put a tremendous amount of funding through our foundation in working with community partners. And I'll give you an HIV example. We do something similar with triple negative breast cancer as well. But one of the reasons why we have these rising rates of HIV in the underserved South is, one, access to healthcare, and very, very importantly, of course, the stigma and discrimination associated with the disease. So we work through on-the-ground community partners. Actually, we have an amazing program with Wake Forest University School of Divinity that goes through also churches in the South to get health education out around preventing HIV and or treating HIV to kind of break down some of those barriers as well. The other thing I'll say is, back to this personalized healthcare approach is, it's really important that we continue to support small molecule development in this country. One of the things that I'm fighting right now in Washington is a part of the Inflation Reduction Act, which actually disadvantages small molecules versus large molecules. The government has an ability to negotiate small molecules at 9 years and large molecules at 13 years. Doesn't make any sense. Haven't been able to find anybody in the Beltway that can tell me why that is. But the reality is that for underserved communities, pills are still going to be the best way to be able to cure people or bring people along a path. So we need a surround sound approach to health equity in this country, just as I said, also outside of this country. And science, and the fact that we now have a medicine that could prevent HIV, again, not yet approved, it could be approved this summer, that is only given twice a year. That was done also because we approach it from a health equity standpoint. We understand that many communities, you will not get people to take a daily pill. They don't have access to medicines. But if you can go to your OBGYN twice a year, or your physician, get tested for STDs and get an HIV medicine and be 100% effective, that type of innovation is going to also help underserved communities disproportionately, assuming we can do the work we need to do with community organizations to make sure the information is out there and that we fund individuals that can support those communities. So we have examples in triple-negative breast cancer. I'd love to talk to you more about it and get ideas about it, but it is a huge responsibility of the private sector, and I think we have a megaphone that we need to use with the public sector to make sure we get funding and access for our medicines in this country and around the world. Thanks for the question.
All right. Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
This has been wonderful.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. Good luck with your conference.